Hey there everyone, today I have another album review for you. It's going to be Code Orange Kids' Love Is Love, Return to Dust. Now, around the middle of last month I actually heard of Code Orange Kids for the first time, and I listened to their stuff and I was really liking what I heard. Eventually they dropped a single from the debut album which has just been released, and it was called Flowermouth I. I actually did a review of this track, and I'll leave a link below in case you haven't seen it, but ultimately I thought it was a really great track. It was a unique take on hardcore, and it had a much more bassy, sludgy sound that was absolutely covered in noise and general abrasiveness and horribleness. And again, if you've watched my review, you'll know I loved that track, and it really got me pumped for this new release. So when I heard it was streaming, I was pretty excited. I have listened to this album quite a lot, and I think I've finalised my opinions on it really, because it actually surprised me. It's a really varied album. There's lots of interesting parts that kind of throw you off. It's not just an album of these really slow, sludgy, bassy songs. It's a lot more detailed and got a lot more depth than that. But anyway, to kick open the album is Flowermouth I, which is the single I told you about. Again, if you want to hear my full opinion on that track, I'll leave a link below. But it was just a really great, in-your-face, sludgy, riffy, bassy opener that really gave you a good overview of what this band does. The next track, Around My Neck, On My Head, is a blitz of blast beats and super noisy, abrasive aggression. It's much faster than the first track and a lot of the tracks on here. It's one of the faster ones on the album, actually. One thing I really love is the very ending, where basically everything cuts out and you just have the drums playing the blast beat, and eventually it slows down to the point where it sort of falls out of time with itself, and you can hear every single thumping bass drum hit and every single snare hit, and it really just hits hard. The next track, Sleep, I've Been Slipping, is essentially very similar to Flowermouth. It's a very sludgy, bassy track. And actually, one thing that was very nice on this track, I thought anyway, is there was no guitar. This is all bass guitar making these sounds, and drums and vocals, but you get the point. It's just super thick and dense, and it sounds great. The next track, Liar's Trudge, is where things start to get interesting. The first half of the track is essentially just a really fast punk track with the whole thick, dense production this whole album has. But one thing I liked about this track, on both halves essentially, is that there were loads of sounds being utilised over this track, creating a very eerie atmosphere, lots of it hanging in the background, and there was just a ton of attention to detail really here. However, the second part of the track is just this clean guitar riff being played, and it creates a very bleak and dark atmosphere. I'm loving the clean vocals and the eerie sounds over the top. The next track, Colours Into Nothing, kind of picks up where the last track left off. But one thing this track did that I absolutely adored was that it essentially kind of collapsed in on itself, like self-destruction kind of thing. It was really bizarre. It opens with a clean guitar playing a very beautiful, dark and atmospheric riff. Other things come into the mix over time. They really know how to build it, really know how to keep things mixed and interesting. Eventually the drums around the minute mark sort of kick in, fairly buried underneath the clean guitar that's playing, but eventually it all just sort of kicks in. It has a very soothing quality about it, despite it being very thick and heavy. There are these great buried vocals in the background. They're not so buried that you can't hear them, and they still give effect, and it's just really well placed. But like I said at the start, the thing I loved most about this track was the way it sort of collapsed in on itself. As it gets further and further towards the end, so many noises come into play. Loads and loads of really ear-piercing feedback, just really bizarre sounds that kind of thicken up the whole thing. And it gets to the point where the noise elements really replace everything else more or less, with the exception of the drums, and it just becomes this kind of super thick, noisy thing that's built so much momentum that you just can't stop it at this point. It's just a bulldozer. And the way it does it is it kind of makes it feel like everything's just becoming more and more claustrophobic. It feels like the walls are closing in on you and you're getting really absorbed into this really thick, dense atmosphere. It's just a phenomenally well-crafted track. And like I said, a lot of the album does this. Flowermouth I is a great example. Towards the end it just gets super noisy and dense. Another track that really pays a lot of attention to detail, like the track I just described, is essentially the interlude Calm Breathe. It's the only song on the album I wouldn't describe as dark and thick. It opens with a very reverb-soaked, clean guitar, and then the bass comes in to sort of warm things up. And it's just very refreshingly clear and nice. Towards the midway point, there's a tremolo-picked guitar that just sounds very nice and kind of adds to this very soothing atmosphere. And there's plenty of other little bits of detail that come in that essentially make what is an interlude track a more interesting listen, really. The album closes with the track Bloom Return to Dust. This track is essentially just a mid-paced riff monster, very, very bass heavy, very dark, very thick. In fact, the opening riff is played on its own, and the low ends on this guitar sound like they could easily get placed onto a drone metal record like Earth or Sun. They're just that thick and that low and bassy. And as it's being played on its own as well, it kind of just adds to that drone quality about it. Once it kicks in, it's just this super thick, sludgy song that it's just great. I mean, honestly, if you've listened to this review so far, you get the general idea. This whole album is just packed with really great songs. There's a mix of super heavy, sludgy stuff, a mix of really sort of dark, more clean sounding stuff. And to be honest, in summary, this album is just one hell of a debut album. It shows a lot of promise, and I do feel like this band are doing something exciting within this genre. And honestly, I just can't wait to see what the future holds. And another thing, I really cannot wait to see these guys live. Hopefully it isn't too long before they hit UK shores, but we'll just have to wait and see, I guess. I will say that one of the album's flaws was definitely the fact that the sludgy songs are kind of hard to differentiate between. They kind of use a lot of the same ideas within these kind of songs, which to me is kind of a reflection of not necessarily great or developed songwriting. That's not to say that the songs were bad or weren't there, I just felt like some of them were similar and the songwriting could have been stronger. As far as other complaints go, I do feel like sometimes the vocals are a tiny bit too buried into the mix, but at this point I'm just nitpicking. And like I said, in the long run, this album is just great. It's one hell of a debut. I can't wait to see what they do in the future, like I said. So I suppose we just have to wait and see, really. Ultimately, I feel like this album deserves an 8 to an 8.5 out of 10. I thought it was great. I just feel like these guys are kind of carving their own path in hardcore. Admittedly, a very bleak, dark, dingy cave of a path, but a path nonetheless that's interesting, that's unique, and I will definitely keep an eye on this band in the future. If you're into Converge or any sort of sludge metal, even some of the sort of slower hardcore punk stuff, like perhaps Heights or Trash Talk when they're being slow and sludgy, then you should definitely give this band a go. These guys are on Death Wish, which is actually Jacob's record label. Fun fact. Or more specifically, he's the co-founder, but you get the point. Anyway, I'm going to call it there. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear what you think about this band. If you've heard this record, what do you think of it? Comment below. And I'll catch you guys and gals later.